The Galactic Classification Committee had a terrible sense of humor. That's the only explanation for why they'd classify Earth as a Class 12 death world, while simultaneously inviting its inhabitants to join the Galactic Federation. It's like asking someone to a dinner party, but making them eat in the backyard because they smell funny. You understand, explained Ambassador Zextral, a bioluminescent octopoid whose 12 appendages waved in what was supposedly a calming pattern, that your status as a death world species comes with certain restrictions. Dr. Eleanor Wright, Earth's representative, crossed her arms and leaned back in a chair that was clearly designed for someone with a different number of limbs and spinal configuration. The entire room, no, the entire space station, felt like it had been designed by a committee of aliens who had only vaguely heard of bipedal species. Restrictions, she repeated flatly. Because we had the audacity to evolve on a planet that occasionally tries to kill us. Not occasionally, corrected Zextral, illuminating in patterns of blue and green that the universal translator interpreted as pedantic amusement. Your world experiences catastrophic weather events, tectonic instabilities, variations in atmospheric pressure that would crush most sentient life, radiation from your singular star that causes cellular damage, and indigenous flora and fauna that are predominantly toxic, venomous, or physically dangerous. We call that Tuesday, Eleanor muttered. The joke went over Zextram's bulbous head, all 17 of them. Regardless, the ambassador continued, the committee has reviewed your application and believes that humans may provide unique perspectives to our scientific endeavors. Your adaptability to extreme conditions is, while disturbing, potentially useful. And that's how Dr. Eleanor Wright became the first human to join a Galactic Federation research team. Not because of her 3 PhDs in exobiology, comparative xenophysiology, and adaptive genomics. Not because of her groundbreaking work on cross-species medical applications. No. It was because humans could survive being coughed on by most of the galaxy's pathogens without dissolving into a puddle of organic soup. Talk about stellar career advancement opportunities. The research vessel Harmonious Discovery was anything but harmonious, and the only thing being discovered was Eleanor's growing irritation with her new colleagues. Please refrain from moving so abruptly, requested scientist First Class Krillvok, a gelatinous entity that resembled nothing so much as a thinking jello mold with eye stalks. Your species' tendency toward rapid locomotion is unsettling to many of us. Eleanor, who had been walking at what she considered a funeral pace, bit back a sarcastic reply. Instead, she slowed down to a glacial crawl that would make continental drift look hasty. My apologies, she said, counting backward from 10 in her head. I'll try to be more gelatinous. Much appreciated, Krillvok burbled, completely missing the sarcasm dripping from Eleanor's words like acid. The ship's common area hosted 8 different species, each more improbable than the last. There was Dren, a crystalline being who communicated through light refractions and who claimed to be 40,000 years old. Eleanor had initially been impressed, until she learned that Dren's species measured time in micro-units. That made a year approximately 37 Earth minutes. Then there was TikTok, not its real name, which consisted of a series of rhythmic clicks that Eleanor couldn't pronounce. An insectoid mathematician whose exoskeleton changed colors based on the complexity of whatever equation they were solving. Currently, they were a muted lavender, which Eleanor had learned meant they were contemplating something roughly equivalent to basic addition. The mission leader was Grand Theorist Plex, a gaseous entity contained within an environment suit that looked like a walking snow globe. Plex had 7 degrees in planetary sciences and wouldn't let anyone forget it. We approached the study site, announced Plex, their voice coming through the translator as unnaturally deep and resonant. Prepare for atmospheric entry. Eleanor looked out the viewport at the approaching planet, designated CNX 372, but nicknamed Tranquility by the Galactic Federation. According to the briefing, Tranquility was a Class 2 planet, a paradise world with stable weather patterns, minimal tectonic activity, and life forms that were predominantly non-threatening. In other words, boring as hell. But this was where the Federation had detected unusual energy readings that didn't match any known natural phenomena. The team's job was to investigate, catalogue, and explain. Standard scientific procedure, just on an interstellar scale. Dr. Wright, called Plex, floating over to her station. You will be part of the ground team. Your Robust constitution may be useful if there are unexpected environmental hazards. Translation: if something goes wrong, you're less likely to die immediately. Honored to serve as your canary in the coal mine, Eleanor replied with a tight smile. I don't understand that reference, said Plex. Earth history. Birds used to warn miners about toxic gases. You sent avian species to detect hazards, rather than using technology. Plex's gas cloud swirled in what Ellen had learned was their version of shocked disbelief. It was a long time ago. How barbaric, Plex commented. Though efficient, I suppose. As the ship began its descent, Eleanor couldn't help but wonder what she had gotten herself into. Back on Earth, she'd been respected, even revered in her field. Here, she was essentially the expedition's disposable safety equipment. The ship touched down with barely a tremor, a far cry from the bone-rattling landings of Earth's early space program. The viewports showed a landscape that looked like it had been designed by a committee with access to every Earth biome catalog but no understanding of how they fit together. Purple-tinged grass-like growth stretched to the horizon, interspersed with floating bubble trees that seemed to defy gravity. The sky was a peaceful mint green, with two small suns providing gentle illumination. Atmospheric analysis complete, announced Tick-Tock, their exoskeletons shifting to a confident blue. Composition is compatible with all team members' requirements. No detected toxins or pathogens. Surface temperature is 294 standard units, added Krillvok, within optimal range. Gravity at 0.89 Earth standard, Eleanor contributed. She'd insisted on using Earth as her reference point, rather than the galactic standard, which was based on some long-dead civilization's homeworld and made no intuitive sense to her. Excellent, Plex's snow globe bobbed in approval. We will establish a base camp here and begin investigations tomorrow at first light. The team disembarked, each member carrying equipment specialized for their particular scientific discipline. Eleanor's pack contained standard geological sampling tools, a portable molecular analyzer, and her personal tablet loaded with research notes. She also had a small kit of Earth items she'd brought along, including a Swiss Army knife that had raised all sorts of security concerns until she'd demonstrated that it was in fact just a very versatile tool and not some kind of primitive weapon. If they only knew about the actual knife strapped to her ankle, they'd probably have had collective aneurysms. Camp setup was efficient, with prefabricated shelters that essentially unfolded themselves. By the time the larger of the two suns began to set, the research base looked like it had been there for months, instead of hours. Most impressive, commented Dren, their crystalline structure refracting the dying sunlight into rainbow patterns. On my world, establishing a research outpost takes 17 cycles. How long is a cycle in Earth time? Eleanor asked, always trying to find common reference points. Approximately what you would call 3 weeks. Seems inefficient. We believe in thorough preparation, Duran replied, their tone suggesting mild offense. Right, of course. Eleanor decided to change the subject. So these energy readings we're investigating, what exactly are we looking for? Plex floated over, their environment suit humming softly. The readings suggest a form of energy transformation unlike anything in the Federation database, potentially a new natural phenomenon, or perhaps evidence of a previously unknown civilization. Exciting, Eleanor said, and meant it. Despite her frustrations with her teammates' attitudes, the science itself was fascinating. This was why she'd agreed to join the expedition in the first place, the chance to discover something truly new. Indeed, agreed Plex. Though I must remind everyone that as a Class 2 world, any indigenous intelligence would be non-aggressive and likely pre-technological. Our protocols for non-interference are still in effect. So we observe, record, but don't interact, summarized Eleanor. Precisely. Now we should all rest. Tomorrow will be a full research day. As the alien scientists retired to their respective shelters, Eleanor remained outside for a moment, looking up at the unfamiliar stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, a tiny blue marble that these beings considered too dangerous to casually visit. If only they knew what humans were really capable of. The trouble began on the third day. The team had been methodically surveying in an expanding spiral pattern from their base camp, taking readings and samples. The energy signature they were tracking seemed to be coming from a region about 12 kilometers to the east, near what appeared to be a range of low hills covered in the strange bubble trees. Today we will reach the primary investigation site, announced Plex during the morning briefing. We will divide into 3 teams to approach from different vectors. Dr. Wright, You will accompany Krillvok and TikTok on the southern approach. Eleanor nodded, secretly pleased to be grouped with two of the less annoying team members. Krillvok might be fussy, but they were genuinely brilliant at environmental analysis, and TikTok, for all their mathematical snobbery, had a childlike curiosity that Eleanor found endearing. The three set out after breakfast, carrying portable scanners and sample collection equipment. The journey was pleasant, the temperature mild, the terrain gentle, and even the local equivalent of insects seemed more interested in the colorful floating pollen than in biting the researchers. "This energy pattern is most unusual," commented TikTok as they walked, their exoskeleton shifting through thoughtful shades of teal. "It pulses at regular intervals, yet the amplitude varies in what appears to be a non-random pattern." "Could it be artificially generated?" Eleanor asked. "Possible but improbable," replied Krillvok, their gelatinous form quivering slightly as they moved across the uneven ground. The planetary survey indicated no evidence of technological civilization. "Surveys can miss things," Eleanor pointed out. "Earth's early civilizations left structures that would be easily overlooked from orbit if you didn't know exactly what to look for." "A fair observation," acknowledged TikTok, their color shifting to an impressed Ingo. "Your species' historical perspective is occasionally useful." Eleanor bit back a retort. Coming from TikTok, that was practically gushing praise. As they approached the hills, the scanner readings grew stronger. The pulses of energy were now coming at intervals of exactly 73.2 seconds, with varying intensity. "Definitely a patent," Eleanor murmured, studying her tablet. "Natural phenomena rarely have such precise timing." "Yet there is no visible source," noted Krillvok, their eye stalks swiveling in all directions. "No structures or technology." They reached the base of the first hill, where the bubble trees grew in greater concentration. Up close, Eleanor could see that each bubble was actually a transparent sac filled with luminescent fluid that glowed faintly even in daylight. "These organisms are fascinating," she said, reaching out toward one. "Careful," warned Krillvok. "Unknown biota should not be touched directly." Eleanor pulled her hand back, embarrassed at her lapse in protocol. "You're right. Let me scan it first." The molecular analyzer showed nothing immediately concerning. The fluid inside the bubbles appeared to be a complex but non-toxic bioluminescent compound. What was strange, however, was that the bubbles seemed to be pulsing in time with the energy readings. "I think we've found our source," Eleanor said, showing her readings to the others. "These trees, they're generating the energy signature." TikTok's exoskeleton shifted to an excited yellow. "Biological energy production on this scale is unprecedented. This could revolutionize our understanding of xenobotany." "We should collect samples," suggested Krillvok, already preparing a specimen container. Eleanor was about to agree when something caught her eye, a subtle movement among the trees, further up the hill. She squinted, trying to make out details. "Did you see that?" she asked. Her companions paused, their attention now diverted to where she was pointing. "I detect no movement," said TikTok after a moment. "Nor I," agreed Krillvok. Eleanor frowned. "I could have sworn I saw something moving between the trees. Something large." "The planet was thoroughly surveyed," Krillvok reminded her. "No large fauna were detected." "Right," Eleanor said, unconvinced. "Let's just be cautious as we collect samples." They proceeded with their work, carefully extracting fluid from several of the bubble trees and taking tissue samples from the trunk-like structures that supported them. All the while, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Her unease proved justified 30 minutes later, when the ground beneath them began to tremble. "Seismic activity?" questioned TikTok, their exoskeleton flickering to alarmed orange. The planetary data indicated minimal tectonic movement. "This doesn't feel like an earthquake," Eleanor said, her Earth instincts kicking in. "It's too rhythmic." The trembling was indeed coming in pulses that matched exactly the energy signature they'd been tracking. "We should return to base camp," suggested Krillvok, their gelatinous form quivering more from apparent fear than from the ground's movement. Before Eleanor could respond, the earth directly in front of them erupted upward, sending dirt and vegetation flying in all directions. From the newly formed hole emerged a creature that shouldn't exist on a paradise world. A massive, segmented creature that resembled a cross between an earthworm and a centipede, but the size of a subway train. "Run!" Eleanor shouted, already backing away. "Back to camp, now!" Krillvok didn't need to be told twice, their gelatinous form flowing across the ground with surprising speed. TikTok, however, stood frozen, their exoskeleton cycling rapidly through colors of panic and fascination. Tick-tock! Eleanor grabbed the insectoid's arm. We need to move! The creature reared up, revealing a circular mouth lined with concentric rings of teeth. It emitted a high-pitched sound that made Eleanor's teeth vibrate, and then the bubble trees around them began to pulse brightly in response. That's when Eleanor understood. "They're lures," she gasped. "The trees are lures, like anglerfish, and we're the prey." The revelation came just as the creature lunged forward. Eleanor shoved Tick-tock out of the way and dove in the opposite direction, narrowly avoiding being swallowed whole. The monster crashed into a cluster of bubble trees, causing them to burst and spray luminescent fluid everywhere. Eleanor scrambled to her feet and helped Tick-tock up. "We need to get to higher ground," she said, pointing to a rocky outcropping about 50 meters away. "That thing is a burrower. It might have trouble on solid rock." Tick-tock, still in shock, managed a jerky nod. Together they ran for the rocks, the ground trembling behind them as the creature pursued. "Contact the other teams," Eleanor shouted as they ran. "Warn them." Tick-tock fumbled with their communication device, their normally precise movements hampered by panic. "No response. The energy pulses must be interfering with our signals." They reached the rocky area just as the creature caught up. Eleanor pushed Tick-tock behind a large boulder and pressed herself against it, breathing hard. "What is that thing?" Tick-tock whispered, their voice modulator barely functioning through their fear. "How did the survey miss it?" "It probably stays underground most of the time," Eleanor theorized, trying to think through the adrenaline pumping through her system. "The trees lure prey, the vibrations alert it, and it comes up to feed." "Most efficient," Tick-tock commented, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding fear. Their exoskeleton settled on a thoughtful purple, before immediately flickering back to panic orange as the creature slammed against the other side of their rocky shelter. "We need a plan," Eleanor said, quickly assessing their situation. They were temporarily safe, but cut off from the rest of the team, and their escape route back to camp was blocked by a giant, hungry, worm centipede thing. Just another Tuesday, really. She pulled out her tablet, which was miraculously still intact, and reviewed the scans they'd taken of the bubble trees. These bioelectric pulses the trees emit. Their communication. The creature responds to specific patterns. "Can we disrupt the pattern?" Tick-tock asked, their color shifting toward hopeful green. "Better," Eleanor said, a plan forming. "We can change it. Look at this frequency analysis. There's a pattern when the creature is called, but there's a different pattern just before that. What if that's a warning to other organisms, a predator coming signal?" "Brilliant deduction," Tick-tock said, genuine admiration in their voice. "But how do we generate such a signal?" Eleanor dug through her pack until she found her portable molecular analyzer. "This has a sonic emitter for breaking down sample materials. If I recalibrate it to the right frequency..." She worked quickly, fingers flying over the controls as she reprogrammed the device. The monster continued to circle their rocky refuge, occasionally testing the perimeter, but seeming reluctant to climb onto the rocks. "Ready?" Eleanor finally said. "When I activate this, we run. Straight back to camp, no detours, understand?" Tick-tock's exoskeleton shifted to a determined blue. "Understood." Eleanor took a deep breath, then pressed the activation button. The device emitted a pulsing tone that was barely audible to her, but the effect on the environment was immediate. The bubble trees near them began to pulse in a different pattern, and the giant creature reacted instantly, rearing back as if struck, then quickly burrowing back into the ground. "Now!" Eleanor grabbed Tick-tock, and they ran, leaving the emitter behind to continue broadcasting its warning signal. They sprinted back through the alien landscape, not slowing until they reached the edge of the camp. Krilvok was there, along with several other team members, all looking alarmed. "What happened?" demanded Plex, floating forward. Krilvok returned in a state of extreme distress, babbling about a giant creature. "The planet isn't what we thought," Eleanor said between gasps for breath. "Those energy readings, they're from biological lures. There's a massive predator using them to hunt." As if to punctuate her statement, a distant roar echoed across the landscape, followed by the ground shaking beneath their feet. "Impossible," insisted Plex. "This is a Class 2 world. The survey was wrong," Eleanor cut in. "This planet should be reclassified immediately. We need to evacuate." "We cannot simply abandon our research based on one encounter," argued Dren, their crystalline form refracting disapproval. "The Galactic Science Academy protocols clearly state..." Another roar, closer this time, silenced the debate. "I don't think the worm cares about your protocols," Eleanor said dryly. And there's probably more than one of them. The team's sensors began pinging warnings as multiple energy signatures appeared on their scanners, converging on the camp from different directions. The ship, Plex decided, their gaseous forms swirling with anxiety. We must return to the ship immediately. But it wasn't that simple. As the team hurriedly gathered their most essential equipment, 3 more of the giant worm centipede creatures erupted from the ground around the perimeter of their camp, effectively cutting off the path to the ship. "We're surrounded," reported one of the scientists, a spindly being that resembled a walking stick figure. "All routes to the vessel are blocked." The team devolved into panic. Krillvok began secreting a distress pheromone that made the air nearly unbreathable. TikTok's exoskeleton was cycling through collars so rapidly they looked like a living disco ball, and even Plex's environment suit was emitting warning beeps as their gaseous form became unstable with fear. Eleanor, however, felt an odd sense of calm descend. This, finally, was a situation where being from a death world might actually be useful. "Everyone shut up and listen," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Those things hunt by sensing vibrations. The more you panic and move around, the more attractive you are as prey." The team fell silent, looking at her with expressions ranging from desperation to skepticism. "I have a plan," Eleanor continued. "But you need to follow my instructions exactly." The plan was simple but required precise timing and complete cooperation. Using the data from their scanners and Eleanor's observations of the creature's behavior, they determined that the monsters were drawn to the strongest vibrations, which currently came from their panic-stricken movement and the power generators of their camp. "We're going to create a diversion," Eleanor explained. "Program all the remaining field emitters to broadcast the same disruption frequency I used earlier, but set them to activate in sequence, creating a path away from the ship." "And while the creatures followed this false trail?" asked Plex. "We move quietly in single file, directly to the ship. No running, no panicking. Slow, deliberate movements that create minimal vibrations." "That's your plan?" demanded Dren incredulously. "Walk calmly past giant predators?" "Yes," Eleanor said firmly. "Because they hunt primarily by vibration and possibly bioelectric signatures, not sight. If we move quietly enough and mask our own energy signatures, we might register as background noise, rather than prey." "Right," repeated Krivog, quivering. "It's that, or wait to be eaten," Eleanor pointed out. "Your choice." In the end, they agreed because they had no better options. Eleanor programmed the emitters while the rest of the team prepared for evacuation, bringing only what they could carry silently. "Remember," she instructed as they prepared to move out. "Single file, arms length apart, step where I step. No matter what happens, maintain formation and keep moving toward the ship. Don't run unless I say so." She activated the first emitter, and as predicted, one of the creatures immediately moved toward the sound, burrowing just beneath the surface, creating a visible trail as it went. "Now," Eleanor whispered, leading the team out in the opposite direction. Walking in measured steps, the group moved across the open ground between their camp and the ship. Eleanor led the way, carefully testing each footfall before committing her weight, mindful of creating unnecessary vibrations. Behind her, the alien scientists mimicked her movements with varying degrees of success. Plex, being mostly gaseous, moved almost silently. Dren's crystalline structure made each step a challenge, creating tiny tinkling sounds that made Eleanor wince. They were halfway to the ship when one of the creatures, apparently not fooled by their decoy, began moving in their direction. "Freeze!" Eleanor whispered, holding up a hand. The team stopped, some trembling with fear but maintaining their positions. The ground bulged slightly as the creature passed nearby, apparently sensing something, but not locking onto them as prey. After an agonizing 30 seconds, the bulge moved away, following one of the decoy signals. "Continue," Eleanor breathed, resuming their careful pace. They reached the ship without further incident, filing silently up the ramp and into the safety of the hull. Only when the hatch sealed behind them did anyone dare to speak. "Initiate emergency launch protocols," ordered Plex, floating rapidly toward the bridge. The ship's engines hummed to life, drawing an immediate response from the creatures outside. The ground around the vessel began to heave and crack as multiple worm centipedes converged, sensing the powerful vibrations. "They're going to attack the ship!" exclaimed TikTok, their exoskeleton flashing alarm red. "Hull integrity at risk," reported the ship's AI. "Recommend immediate departure." "Launch now," commanded Plex. The ship shuddered as its thrusters engaged, fighting against the pull of several massive creatures that had partially emerged and were now attempting to drag it back down. Metal groaned, warning lights flashed, and for a moment it seemed the vessel might be torn apart. Then, with a wrenching sound that reverberated throughout the hull, the ship broke free and shot upward, leaving the frustrated predators behind. Silence fell over the bridge as the ship climbed into orbit. The team stared at Eleanor with expressions that ranged from shock to newfound respect. "How did you know what to do?" asked TikTok finally, their exoskeletons settling on a curious purple. Eleanor shrugged. "Earth has predators too, different ones, but similar principles apply. When you grow up on a death world, you learn a thing or two about survival." "Your actions saved the entire team," acknowledged Plex, their gas cloud swirling in what Eleanor had come to recognize as their version of a formal bow. "The Galactic Science Academy will hear of your contribution." "Great," Eleanor said, allowing herself a small smile. "Maybe they'll reconsider that whole Class 12 Death World classification." "On the contrary," replied Plex, "I believe this experience validates the classification. Only a species evolved in such conditions could have formulated an effective response to our predicament." Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. In a strange way, Plex was right. The very traits that made humans dangerous in the eyes of the Galactic Federation, their adaptability, their predatory instincts, their ability to function under extreme stress, were what had saved the team today. "You know what's ironic?" she said instead. "Your paradise world turned out to be more immediately lethal than Earth has been in centuries. Maybe your classification system needs work." "A valid observation," admitted Dren, their crystalline structure reflecting thoughtfully. "Perhaps we have been evaluating worlds based on incomplete criteria. Or perhaps," suggested TikTok, their color shifting to philosophical blue, "we have been defining danger too narrowly." As the ship accelerated away from the planet, Eleanor looked back at the seemingly peaceful green world below. From orbit, there was no sign of the terror that lurked beneath its surface. Just as she realized, an alien visitor might look at Earth's blue oceans and green continents and miss the complex dangers and wonders they contain. "You know," she said to no one in particular, "humans have a saying, 'Don't judge a book by its cover.' Seems like it applies to planets too." "What is a book?" asked Krilvok. Eleanor laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "I'll explain later. First, I want to help rewrite your survey protocols. I think we need to add a section on how to identify predator-prey relationships in seemingly peaceful ecosystems." "Agreed," said Plex. "And perhaps we should reconsider our assessment of humans as well." "How so?" Eleanor asked, raising an eyebrow. "The committee classified humans as dangerous because you evolved on a world that required aggression and cunning to survive. What we failed to consider is that those same traits, properly directed, make you uniquely valuable in certain situations. Like when giant worm centipedes are trying to eat your research team?" "Precisely," agreed Planks. "In retrospect, it seems short-sighted to have marginalized a species with such useful survival instincts." "Well," Eleanor said with a wry smile, "as another human saying goes, it takes one to know one." "Among what?" asked Dren. "An apex predator," Eleanor replied, her smile widening. "Because that's what humans really are, not just survivors of a death world, but its masters." The aliens exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly re-evaluating their understanding of their human colleague, and perhaps of humanity as a whole. As the ship set course back to Galactic Federation space, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She'd come on this mission to advance scientific understanding, but she'd ended up advancing something equally important: respect for her species. The galaxy had just learned what an apex predator really was, and somehow, Eleanor suspected, future human representatives wouldn't be quite so easily dismissed. After all, Tuesday on Earth prepared you for pretty much anything the universe could throw at you.